And here we are in our very first Head Game podcast, live from the Mindful Athlete Training Studio. My name is Dr. Lee Picariello. You are watching the Head Game, powered by Mindful Athlete Training. It's been a long time coming. We have started many, many moons ago in the radio industry, courtesy of WBCB. Thank you so much for everything that you have taught us. I personally thank you. Especially Foxy.
Foxy, I was going to say Foxy.
A little shout out to Foxy. I'm here with Jessica Ferdinand.
Hello.
And how are you doing?
I'm doing just great, actually.
You are?
Yeah, see, I'm wearing my baseball jersey because I do think that sports is going to come back eventually.
I think that you're hoping that sports
Next
are going
Friday,
to come back.
I'm going to come decked out because they will be their first games on Friday at like 7 o'clock.
Really?
Yeah, so you know I'm coming.
Are you pushing for the no fan movement?
I honestly, I don't care as long as I can watch a game on TV. I usually watch the game on TV. I can't afford to go to the games. All these fans can. So
Right.
I'm also a little jealous of them. They get to go to the game. So, whatever. Also, I'm wearing my jersey because I had this very strange goal. I just want to kind of be known. Like when the Head Game just lifts off and we're super famous, I just want to be known as the girl who wears jerseys.
Oh.
Like not even, that's Jessica Ferdinand. I know. I don't need
you're
that.
You're already thinking about how you're going to be branding
that's how my mind
yourself.
works. Yeah.
Right.
Branding. So who knows what jerseys I'll come up with.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to stay steady with Philly for right now, though.
It's good that you have a general sense of who you want to be, though, because that's important. That's all about identity.
I do have other dreams, but
you just want to be. How about just Jersey girl?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any New Jersey roots in your bloodline, family?
Yes, I have family that
Could
lives in Red Bank.
Could you technically really be Jersey girl?
My father was born in Toms River, so technically I was born in Toms River.
Okay, so technically you're a Jersey girl.
I really don't like that.
But you were born in.
I actually prefer to be a Philly. Actually, there's a lot of violence happening right now in Philly, so I don't want to say that right now.
Okay.
I don't really know why that's happening.
That you don't want to pull down your positive karma with your Phillies jersey.
So I'm standing with the Philly sports.
Okay.
I am the
Fair
Philly
enough.
sports.
So we are in, I think, our 43rd episode. This is Head Game podcast number 43.
Podcast.
Yeah. Yes. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. We're calling it 43, but really that's a fair amount of radio shows which we converted to podcast formats, courtesy of you.
Thank you.
Very well done. Another quick little shout out. Social
I haven't
media,
looked at you. This is weird. I feel like,
am
I making you uncomfortable? I'm like just staring into your eyes.
I think it's the glasses. And
I need some glasses. I'll bring glasses next time.
But you haven't seen me in quite a while because we've been doing this virtually.
Yeah.
Right? We went through
it's definitely different.
The quarantine Zoom phase. And now here we are in our...
Forever part of us.
Our very own homegrown studio.
Yeah.
How about that?
It's come full circle.
How does that make you feel?
Like I'm part of something bigger than myself.
Which gives you a sense of...
meaning. Pride. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So today's discussion is all about fear. It's false evidence appearing real. Our little acronym for the day. Fear. False evidence appearing real. So very often, what I first learned way back in my doctoral training is when you really have a concept that you want to share, you do research, you write a first draft, you edit, you write a second draft, and you eventually want to come to some conclusion. But in my lifelong experience, outside of academics, I've learned it's incredibly more effective to just start with what you really want to finish with. So in the essence of fear, false evidence appearing real, I'm just going to ask you, what are you afraid of?
Really? You're going to come out with that question?
I'm going
First? I thought that was going to be a last question.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm going to start with what we typically finish with. What are you afraid of?
I think that this answer will get much more transparent throughout the podcast, but right now the first thing that comes to my mind is something that I always said since I was little, and for some reason, and we can really analyze this because I can analyze it, is just being like lost in the ocean. It's just me in the ocean. Now,
right.
Is that a sense of not being in control? Maybe that's really my fear. That's what I'm saying. We can analyze it.
Have you ever seen the movie Unbreakable or read the book?
Is it about being lost in the ocean?
That's certainly part of it, yes. It's about a World War II POW.
Oh, that's way more interesting than what I thought.
Angelina Jolie is actually the director of the movie. And it is about a young Italian immigrant who had all kinds of childhood problems, who joined the military. He was rebellious. He was oppositional, broke the law a few times.
Sounds like me.
When he was young.
Yeah.
And ended up getting drafted, World War II, got shot down in a bomber in the middle of the Pacific. And at that time, don't know if it has since been broken, set the record for number of days in a raft.
This is a true story.
All true story. Which he then survived, but was captured by whoever it was they were fighting.
In Italy?
Which is escaping me. He had drifted so far that he was found out to be, he thought that he was, on good terms, that he had floated to freedom, but he actually floated into enemy hands. He's then a POW for years where he is tortured. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
This is a crazy...
But when you talk about fear and you talk about, most people, they think about the unknown. They think about areas of their life that they don't necessarily want to go to very often. Very often people have a fear of death, a fear of illness.
Yeah.
A fear of losing loved ones. I think these are commonalities. But in today's world, especially, the COVID-19 world, which there it is again, we can't really go more than 15 minutes without bringing that up. The type of emotional response that it elicits, what's happening to all of us. So when I ask you what you're fearful of, and I appreciate the honesty, let's just kind of peel the onion back one more layer. What is it about a fear response that you think encourages different types of behavior, both in yourself and others?
Well, fear is so interesting to me because I think there's two different types of fear. I think there's this actual fear that's built into our genetic code. Like we are supposed to fear because that kept us alive 100 years ago. And we now have this, I don't want to say disingenuine because, we're still getting the same genetic things are happening to us when we're fearing these things. But it's interesting. I don't know how to put into words right now. I should.
Well, I think you did.
Did I?
Because you're making it about survival. It's a primal
it's like
instinct.
Fight, yeah, that's what I'm getting at. The primal instinct is fear.
It's fight or flight.
But it's interesting that our fear now is like going into a job interview. So our body's preparing to okay, is a lion going to kill us? But really the fear is just speaking to a person maybe in a power. You know what I mean? Like the fear is interesting how 100 years ago to now.
Yes. Well, we don't have to worry about being eaten in most parts of the world when we go to work.
That is true in most parts of the world.
In the present space that we live in, there is not a food shortage, which would encourage more domination for survival, right? Very Darwinian, survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
But I think what we need to take a full step back on and really think about is when our behavior does not always align with what society encourages, is society looking at us and being fearful of that? And how appropriate is that statement in the COVID-19 era of quarantine, of stay at home? Think about the progression. Think about what we've been through.
Yeah.
Think about what we're still enduring. People are going out and doing certain things that other people do not like. And I'm not necessarily talking about grand scale protesting. I'm not talking about the ugliness of rioting. I'm not talking about the mass media frenzy that tends to feed on such negativity. What I'm talking about is how we're just living our lives.
I think the best example of fear is asymptomatic, because now we're hearing that asymptomatic doesn't even it's not contagious, which in my head means you just don't have it. But we're not going to get there. But my point of
but that's
fear
a part
with,
of it. It's a part of it.
Yeah, like asymptomatic, you don't know if you have it, and that's it's fear mongering for the news, since you just have to talk about COVID. We can talk about COVID with fear. There's plenty there. I was afraid of it. I was afraid to go out of my house.
Yeah.
I still wake up sometimes. I'm like, do I have it? Because I coughed. But I'm like, all right.
I wasn't afraid of it to the extent of going out of my house. I think for me, which speaks to our larger discussion, is it presented a lot of unknown factors, which was impacting me so directly. Not that I was unique by any means with my personal experience of COVID. I have 2 children. They were not permitted to go to school. I have a private business that was significantly impacted, in which we had to go virtual almost within 48 hours of things really becoming final. You can't go to work anymore. So there was a lot of uncertainty for me. There was a lot of inconsistency that I had established in my life. And I think this is what fear really does when it pushes back on the habits of how we live. When people can't go out and do what they want to do, they get upset.
Yeah.
That might be go for a 5-mile run. That might be going to work. That might be going out and putting your trash cans in a particular order when you know it's recycling day. We are habitual rote creatures.
Yeah.
We want to do the same things the same way. And when that gets threatened, we get pissed. We get upset. We get turned off. We shut down. We become more insensitive. We become poor communicators. We lash out at loved ones. The list goes on and on and on. Why do you think fear impacts humans the way that it does now, today?
Well, I think this goes on to a question that I had, is fear learned? And I think for us right now, not 100 years ago, in 2020, I do think that fear is learned. I think we have, like I said, in our genetic code, there's fear that's when it does hit the flight or fight, there's like a moment of fear when you actually are fearing. The rest is just anxiety or
Right.
worry or
Well,
fake fear.
That's survival, though, because you're correct. It is built in.
Yeah. There's
it's
like something that
involuntary.
clicks. You
It's our-
feel it.
it's
Your
our
hands
nervous
start
system.
sweating. Yeah.
It's our nervous system, right? It's our internal thermometer starting to rise, which is now a warning. So it's the old. I'm dating myself. It's the old Lost in Space. It's the old
Oh
robot.
my gosh, you're so old.
They made a very poor remake, but the robot was warning, Will Robinson, danger. Our nervous system is our internal robot telling us that danger has arrived.
Yeah.
And when that happens, our physical body and our emotions that follow, because in my particular world, you never actually feel something first. An emotion never comes first.
Mm-hmm.
There's the involuntary physiological arousal because of a situation. I'm thinking something. This is dangerous. I'm afraid. And then we feel fear.
Yeah.
We feel anxiety.
Then you move into people like we like to talk about a lot, David Goggins, who fear for him is just like, all right, now we found what I need to get through. Like he everything leading up, which for a normal human, they like to live in that comfort zone of never actually getting to what they're afraid of or never actually growing. But for somebody like a Navy SEAL, they're taught to get to that point and then get through it, which is interesting to me that you have people who think that way. And then you have people who are like, you know what? I'm really just comfortable. I'm never knowing my fears.
Are they taught to get to that point, or are they taught there is no point?
I think they're taught there is no point.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think that it's more about them trying to overlearn the idea that there is no ceiling. And the only way that you learn that
no ceiling
is to break it. This is, again, another one of the phrases that needs to go down in the podcast library.
I think we should just have like a wall or something every time something good. Yeah. We'll get Michael in. He'll write it on.
When we get our wallpaper, that's on.
Okay. All right.
That's on order.
Yeah.
But when you think about how, to your Navy SEAL point, to David Goggins' point, pushing yourself to your max limits, when you think about this notion of fear, and people, like you said, I was afraid to come out of my house. When we're not engaging in the fear, what is it doing to us psychologically?
I'm very visual. So if we know, are we familiar with Venom? You know, Venom, the superhero, the bad villain.
I am not familiar with Venom.
Okay, well, literally, it just eats over him. Like this is black thing that just completely takes over his human form, and he turns into Venom. That's what I think fear does. It completely, if you allow it, it will just keep creeping until it's completely encompassed you, and now you're like, yep, it's won.
Now you're just a fearful person?
Yeah, now you're just a fearful person.
Right.
For that specific moment, like maybe you can get out of it, but that's what I think. When I think of fear, I think it's important, but it's also just this big negativity that's holding you back most likely, because right now we're not getting eaten by lions. So our fear is going to a job, changing our jobs.
But here's an idea though, okay? Because I like what you're saying about the venom and how it's overcoming you. It's all
maybe
consuming.
You can pull up a clip of Venom.
Right? It's all consuming. So my question is, how many times do you need to be consumed for you to just be fearful, to just be a fearful person? Because you're making it about situations. Hold on. Which allows you to put it in a safer place, saying, you know what? That makes me uncomfortable, but not all the time. Mm-hmm. And the people that I work with, especially in the athletic realm, it's not a question of being fearful all the time. It's, you don't understand, Doc. I'm going to be fearful at that wrong moment, because I have so much anticipation of how well I need to do because of how much I've been working.
Stop the thought. That's what I would say. Oop. Enough. You're allowing the fears in already. What
am I doing?
It's in. Let it in.
Okay.
It's there already.
So you're saying that it can be a conscious choice that I can stop it.
Yes, if you want to. I think so.
I disagree with you.
Now I'm backtracking, but for your first point, when you're saying, like, does it happen more and more? Do you eventually kind of let it, like, does it overtake you?
I'm just going to challenge you. How do you coach an involuntary nervous system response? Key word being involuntary.
Yeah. Well, that's why I would probably lean more towards breathing. Breathing's involuntary. It's also something that you can control. I think everything is, if you personally feel in control, even if you're having an anxious moment or you're nervous and anxious, if you've practiced it enough, when you're in that moment, you'll know the next time it happens, like, okay, I might feel really nervous, but I'm going to try and take this really good, because it's good energy, and I'm going to put it towards something good. Like, I'm going to put it towards my batting swing or volleyball or whatever sport you are. You know, like, I think it's energy, and if we can take that energy and actually use it, then I think maybe you can overcome fear, but not really overcoming it. You're just like being friends with it. It's like your fear.
You're cohabitating.
Yeah, you cohabitate with your fear.
It's a roommate.
Yeah, you always have a bad roommate.
Right.
You got to be friends with him if you want to live there.
Right. Maybe. I like it. I like where you're going. So if the notion, if the saying, what our mind perceives, our body believes, is true. Do you agree with that? What our mind perceives, our body believes.
100%.
So what you just said to me, though, is that if you can, you're getting that.
I like when people make points to me.
You're getting. Is that excitement or tension?
No, it's excitement.
Is it the venomous fear that's coming over you at this very moment?
I enjoy when, like, something I said.
I've been known to elicit that in some people. Not you.
Well, yeah.
But some people.
No, it's enjoyable for me. Like, if someone proves me wrong, I'm like, yeah.
I'm not trying to prove you wrong.
Prove me wrong.
I'm trying to align in your rightness.
Okay, wait, I have to get back in my
If
thought.
your mind,
Sorry.
what your mind perceives, your body believes.
Right.
What does that mean?
It means that, I'm going to use it for my example.
Please.
If your mind believes that you're going to be scared before you even got there, we're going to say fearful and scared, which is what you're saying your clients, like, I don't want that moment to happen in the wrong moment. You're already thinking it. You already put it out in the universe, because I do believe in some sort of universe energy. Now your body's going to start acting on it. That's how I take that.
Right. So I would agree. So if I have a thought that something is threatening, that something's not bad for me, based on a past experience, based on even an irrational assumption.
Yeah.
If I think that that's no good for me, or that's going to impede my performance, what my mind perceives, my body will believe. Specifically, my heart rate will change. We talk about knowing your bio-cue all the time.
Yeah.
This is classic case in point. This could not be more relevant to that discussion.
What is the bio-cue of someone super nervous? Well, we might have to make an example.
Well, what my point is that if your perception, if your thoughts are that convincing, your body is going to follow. Why? Because of what you mentioned earlier, which is the survival mechanism.
Yeah.
That's what has kept us alive.
Right.
That's part of the evolutionary path of humankind.
It also moves me into, if your mind, this individual's mind is so strong to believe, to have your body believe those thoughts, I know that you can do it in the opposite way. I know that you can visualize.
Flip the script.
Yes, I know you can flip the script.
Mm-hmm. I would say theoretically you can flip the script, but what I'm asking you is it possible? Because as a performance psychologist, as someone who is holistically focused on that human body being fully integrated, you're going to get pushback, not if but when, of how you help somebody as it relates to fear. How does that relate to performance? It's anticipatory fear of ... of what? For the athlete.
Of whatever, of anything, pressure. I think
Right.
pressure is a big fear for people.
I'll take
too.
it one step further. I think the concept is global. Anticipatory anxiety is all about fear of failure. It might be hitting the ball not as well.
Mm-hmm.
It might be losing the game, not making the team, losing your Olympic dream after 4 years of practice. It all depends on the evolutionary scale of the athlete, from the highest developed to the lowest amateur. It's about fear of failure. When you feel your body faltering, when you feel your mind faltering, it's activating themes where you can't control outcome. And now my worst case scenario is starting to unfold right in front of you.
Yeah. Which you're kind of allowing. You're kind of telling yourself, like you're saying, like, no, like I'm thinking about it so much that I'm so hyper focused on it that it's going to happen. Like,
Right.
That's kind of.
But when you say that they're allowing it, that sounds like a tad bit more passive. What I'm saying is I don't think it's as an active choice as most performers realize. Forget athletics. What we're doing right now. Performance. Game day. Skill set. Execute. Because if you don't, then what?
Yeah.
Your personal definition of failure is slowly going to rise and grab hold of you. Why? Because what your mind perceives, your body believes.
I wanted to bring this article in, and it highlighted fear. It was from a psychiatrist. I feel like some people get that confused. Psychiatrist, psychologist. So he was a psychiatrist, and he was just talking on a board in California, and I believe it was of children going back to school. And a lot of the research in general is showing that total worldwide, less than 2% of people have actually died from the virus, and then it's even less for kids because they're not even really getting affected with the small percentages. And this psychiatrist was literally saying, if you don't, and he was asked to talk on a court and to talk about this, and he said, if you you're not letting the kids go back to school because you're afraid that they're going to get sick. You're doing it for your own fear, for your own anxiety. It's the adults. That's why you're not letting them back. Not because you think they're at risk. It's because you have a fear of letting your kid go into school. And he said, like, further, how much that's just going to be traumatizing and totally just ruin who they are as a person if you don't let them go back.
If we take the acronym false evidence appearing real, applying it to the context of this discussion, of our format today, and then couple that with what you just said about statistics and worldwide and number of percentages and child and adolescent versus adult and what is really driving fear. Just this morning, July 16th, is today the 16th?
The 17th.
17th. July 17th, 2020, where fear factor becomes more relevant. Just this morning, Pennsylvania has announced that kids cannot go back to school unless they can maintain a safe 6 feet of social distance all day long.
How does that make you feel?
You have no
I just don't agree with it.
idea.
I look at research. That's how I'm not looking at the news, and I'm not listening to whoever's speaking. I just take the statistics that they're allowing.
I just had a massive jump of adrenaline.
Yeah. From the statistics, it's literally showing that actually it's rare to die from this illness for an adult. It's who it's actually affecting. And the kids, it's like I know somebody who works at a really big, they kind of create all of the lesson plans for schools in the country, and they're on the top of it, like a CEO. And her entire point is, if you don't let kids go back to school, you should never let them go back to school, because COVID-19 is not a good enough reason in her head. And she's like at the front of it, but she can't, there's all these other strings that have to happen. But that's her point. Is
right.
Like, that's not the right reason to not let them go back.
I think there's such a host of reasons that have been discussed, and this narrative is morphing, it's evolving, but it's also shifting as well. It's pulling our attention from other reasons, and we could continue to talk about the factors in how today modern society embraces information, how it's communicated, how there's still so much miscommunication out there. What is the platform? What is the agenda of so many people? And we could go on and on and on. But as we speak about this return to school issue, I'm simply bringing this up because I've read it. Let's assume that the statistics that you are speaking of are ironclad truth. What people, in my humble opinion, continue to hide behind is it doesn't matter if young children are very rarely, if at all, impacted. They will asymptomatically bring it home and kill grandmom and grandpop. And we need to protect the highest risk. And that statement unto itself, you cannot dispute. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. But that has become the fulcrum of this entire issue.
But
I also say that as survival purposes because I already now have to plan to accept this newest order, as it's going to more than likely impact my life, my children's lives, how they develop, and it's all being foregone.
I just can't.
Predicated on theory.
You can't stop them from what you think is going to happen.
Agreed.
We don't know. Actually, the research is coming out that being asymptomatic, it doesn't mean that you're not a carrier, is what it's coming out to be. You just have the virus in your system and it's not affecting you. But either way, if that is true, you can't. It's like, I think an example could be made, if you get what I'm saying.
I get it.
Like, you can't.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, like I'm not going to go play baseball today because I might not hit a home run. It's like, okay, what? Like, you're kind of, what do you mean? Like, you might not, but we don't actually know until you go.
Right.
But to act like kids aren't actually going outside right now, pools are opening, everyone's actually doing things. Like, I think school's the least of their worries.
As an expert in human behavior, and I listen to your very well thought out, based on science, well educated, articulate, rational explanation. This is my pushback.
Okay.
Based on my observations since as early as January 2020. Rationality left the building a long time ago.
Is
Why?
Now you're getting me into a whole other conversation I didn't want to get in.
No, it's not, because part of what we need to do is speak,
is talk about
emotionally
it.
about the whole other issues, but still make it relevant.
Yeah.
Because it is still relevant. It's relevant to fear, Jessica.
It is fear. But that's how I think we're being controlled by the top.
Correct. But if fear is still present and that fear exercises control on the masses, whether you like it or not, young lady, you've got to sit at the table and take a bite of that sandwich.
Well, they know, see, the people who I think are kind of puppeting everything, they know what we were talking about. They know what fear is. They know that if they just have to say there's an epidemic happening and people are asymptomatic, whether we can be asymptomatic for the flu, we don't know. We never actually, why would we even test something we don't have? But I think they were like, okay, this is a great thing to say, because they knew that we, as a common person, would be like, oh my God, I could have it and not have it, like at the same time.
Right.
I'm not going to leave. And they're like, they'll do it to themselves. And that's what I see happening. Make me angry.
And it's okay to be angry.
I could be wrong. This is my opinion.
It's okay to be angry, and it's even more important to share your anger, because I think it's in these times that if we're not fully expressing ourselves and coming full circle, we're actually contributing to the fear. It is 1:30, believe it or not.
Is it really?
We have ripped by. So we're going to take a short break and listen to our sponsors. Courtesy of Jess Ferdinand, my name is Dr. Lee Picariello, and you are watching the Head Game podcast powered by Mindful Athlete Training. So we are back for part 2 of the Head Game podcast powered by Mindful Athlete Training. My name is Dr. Lee Picariello, and we have a new guest today, Dr. Hunter Stevens.
How are you doing?
Morning.
Morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing well today.
Doing okay?
Yes.
So we have been talking about fear, and the acronym that we've come up with is false evidence appearing real. And of course, in today's 2020, you can't talk about fear without bringing up COVID, without bringing up quarantine,
right?
Statistics, numbers. What I thought of, just because I've gotten to know you a little bit more personally, is the real value, I think, behind any discussion about human emotion are the stories that drive it. So what I would like you to do, sir, with your comfort, is to kind of throw yourself out there for the podcast audience to hear. What has all of this been like for you in the midst of your marital engagement, and you've been planning a wedding? What in the world has that life been like for you? Perhaps you can speak on, your relationship with your fiancé, the kind of discussions that you have. How has fear impacted your life?
Yeah, so thank you for that, and thanks for introducing me. So a little bit about who I am. My name is Dr. Hunter Stevens. I played collegiate volleyball at George Mason University, so Division I volleyball. So competition has been a part of my life. I played at the semi-professional level in America, more competitively overseas, and played with players who are also in the Olympics. So competition has been inbred into me, and performance has been something that's been inbred in me in terms of how I've been growing up. And so naturally, when there's performance, there's pressure. When there's pressure to perform well. And when you don't perform well, there's failure. And failure elicits fear. And so when thinking about that in the midst of all of this, I looked back on how do I understand fear? How do I face fear? How do I face situations such as this, especially when there's people around me? And my sports career has shown me that if you can maintain that stable mindset, you can help ease the people around you. And I thought that to be true. I thought that to be concrete and foundational. And I found that over this time, that hasn't been the case. I tend to be a fairly easygoing, go with the flow person, tend to be fairly optimistic, look for opportunities. So I would call myself not only optimistic, but opportunistic. But in this situation, there's no end in sight. There's no clear end in sight. And there's constant news and mixed information. And that has created the sensation around myself and the world of, how do we maintain stability? How do I know that things are going to work out? And when it comes to planning a wedding during this, we set a date 2 years ago. So we locked down thinking we're going to get ahead. We're going to have time to save, being the trying to smart financial aspect of it. I also graduated during this time as well. Haven't had a graduation as part of that time and experience.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And what you thought was going to happen in terms of this going to be the most exciting time of your life has now turned into, well, can grandma be there? Can the people that we want to be there?
A stalemate.
Exactly. And so our venue that we've had for 2 years is on the brink, in the cusp of Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, they just had a moratorium where you can't have more than 50 guests outside, which means a place that we thought we were going to have, that we love for 2 years, is no longer available this year. So we have a decision to make. Do we push it off for another year, and now we're continually pushing that wedding, that experience off, or do we try to have it at somewhere new? And the thoughts that come up are, well, are people going to wear masks? And of course, there's this consciousness of some people are completely fed up with the mask, but some people have to be, want those masks. And obviously there's vulnerable population when you have a wedding. You have family who tend to be, you have older adults, you have friends, you have people from coming out of state. Do those people have to quarantine? And this mixed bag of this celebration, this monumentous occasion, this day that's, I remember my wedding day, I remember the day my child was born. These are the moments. And now there's this cloud, there's this fog around it.
Do you know what gets elicited when I hear you say all that? Is I genuinely feel for you, because you're articulating it in a very comprehensive way. It's well thought out, and I think you're saying it with a fair level of poise. But it's been almost 20 years since I got married, and what you did right there is you kind of took me back to the day that I got married. The plans, the execution, finding out so many things that you can't control the day of your wedding. And but then when you kind of stack it up in a line, Hunter, of the day your child is born, the day that you're married, the day that you got engaged, all of these positive memories, and with the extensive background that you shared relating to your prior sport experience, sport performance ideology, I kept thinking about what's getting stretched the most is your level of flexibility, how you can continue to, which we've talked many times for many different reasons, be resilient in the face of genuine fear for some people.
Yes.
Right? Because, you can throw caution to the wind as a young, fit adult. But when it comes to a decision, a celebratory moment, a monumental moment,
right,
it's so much more than just yourself, because it includes so many that you love. How do you deal with that type of balance in the need to be flexible in this time?
Yeah, and I'd be lying if there isn't this underlying selfish need within that of wanting to be this day. And my fiance, who is an occupational therapist at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who went through the graduate school process just as along with myself, we've worked hard, we've sacrificed, we've put others before ourselves as part of that process. And she continually reminds me of we just wanted one day, the one day that it would be
all about
us,
You.
right? In this selfish way, but in this way of, this is what it is. This is the marriage. This is the process. And we would continually give back. And it's still ultimately about others in that way. But this selfish process in the sense of, it's okay to be selfish on occasion. And I think allowing myself to do that, I think, is very difficult because I tend to be outwardly focusing. And I think when it then comes down to this experience, it still is now taking away from the process of what I wanted in this one moment, or what we wanted in this one moment. And we have to take into account the other people around us. And
Are you saying innately you're more outward?
I think so.
Yeah. And just how you live, how you operate,
Yeah.
the decisions that you make.
Yeah. And I think my service and my career profession is aligned with that in terms of the psychological nature of helping others and listening to others and being there for others and helping them maximize their life and being able to achieve optimal performance, but also having a lifestyle that they feel happy in the most possible way they can.
But as a former athlete myself, I align with what you're saying, having a very specific sport history that has defined me.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who's ever been, it doesn't matter to what level you might take it, been in those shoes can speak to the fact that there's often a contradiction, at least in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
between that self-help or help others
Mm-hmm.
and self-need, beginning with self-drive.
Right.
That is mandatory
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to compete
Mm-hmm.
at a higher level.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if that's neglected, that drive, I think your performance in some way does suffer because you're not driving in terms of making yourself better, in the very nature of then making a team sport, that which I played, better. The team would be better if I'm a better player ultimately. I think that's a part of it as well. And this internal driver of recognizing, I guess my flexibility is going back to your original question of, well, how do I maintain myself and maintain my composure while everyone else, right? It's, can I sit in the middle of the house while the house is on fire? I don't know if that's the best option. And sometimes I have to go and say, well, is everyone else okay first? It's kind of the put your mask on yourself before you put it on the person next to you. But at the same time, I'm recognizing that I want to make sure I'm putting on the mask on someone else first.
Right. And I think also, too, under this shift of how we manage really the core concepts of life when fear does something to
Mm-hmm.
our habitual day in and day out,
Mm-hmm.
there's that disruption in stasis.
Mm-hmm.
I say things like that often.
Right.
It's that physiological upheaval,
Mm-hmm.
as we mentioned earlier on the first half of the show. We're constantly educating people about knowing their bio-cue, knowing about their integration. How is your body working in a line,
Mm-hmm.
leading to high performance? But in these instances,
Mm-hmm.
how is the body combating one another?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any things in particular that you do to try to combat that when they don't align?
Yeah, so just a little disclaimer, I have been working with Dr. Picariello for a while now, and so I've been exposed to some things to help myself regulate. And that's traditional mental skills, diaphragmatic breathing. I sometimes, on my drive to work today, I was thinking, how do I hook myself up to biofeedback equipment maybe once or twice a week, so that I'm getting my own feedback and understanding of it.
Practicing what you preach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's
Remaining a student.
right. And I think, well, in that nature of being a student, I think there's always this laid out goal and this line. And I think every student has this process of, I'll have midterms, I'll have finals, I have assignments in between. And now it's a new road as well. And now in terms of there's no clear direction. As someone who's going from a student to a professional, thinking about that transition as well. And now it's the midst of everything that's happening in the world and planning a wedding at the same time. That chaotic nature is, I have to always attune with myself of what's the next thing. I have to try to set those limits, set those guidelines, not limits, but set guidelines, or select what's the next step for me. So trying to realign myself has been a challenge as well during this, because again, I'm looking at, well, how are other people feeling about that realignment? What does that look like? What's comfortability look like? Again, trying to find a balance within myself and then also the people around me. So I'm always attuning and looking to see how are other people responding to that in a way of, are they comfortable?
You know, a big part of this discussion when we constantly review concepts of fear and how it impacts us, how it grabs us. A side discussion, highly relevant, but sidebar is, can fear, if it's learned, be managed? And is fear something that's more innate in some versus others?
Yeah, it brings up this notion. Well, to answer, I guess, roughly, I think there is an innate fear within all of us. It's a driver. It's a primal fear, which I've heard earlier being discussed. And I think to that point, it's the notion of different people have different thresholds. Understanding some people can take in a little bit more fear, a little bit more loss, use that recognition, use that fear as a driver potentially. But then there's a moment that enough fear can overwhelm you and consume you. And it brings me back to the quote in the Replacements, the movie The Replacements, with the Washington Sentinels, right? Not the new Washington NFL team, and we're not going to speak too much on them right now because of everything that's happening.
When that news story becomes current, I'm sure that there will be plenty to discuss.
Right, absolutely. And so the Washington Sentinels, or in The Replacements, Keanu Reeves, the quarterback, he was talking about his biggest fear on the football field. And he said quicksand, and one of the wide receivers was like, "Quicksand, man, yeah, that stuff's scary. It'll take you out. It'll, head underwater." And the coach, Gene Hackman, was like, "I don't think that's what he meant." And Keanu Reeves starts to explain, it's when you're on the field and one thing bad happens, and then you try to correct it, and then another thing bad happens, and then another, until you're over your head and you can't breathe.
Right. The more you try to get out of quicksand, the more it consumes you.
And I think that's the sense sometimes with the fear, is that we're always trying to solve it. We're always trying to
get ahead,
overcome it. And the more that we struggle against it, sometimes the more that the faster we're going to become overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. And, that's a good point. But I also think, too, that let's go with the quicksand reference. If you're trying to help someone who's in the quicksand, it's a very delicate process.
Right.
Because you don't want to get too close. You don't know what sort of ground is stable for your own self.
Right.
And, of course, we've all seen those really bad outcomes where instead of one person going down with the quicksand, it's more than one. And I think that's what fear also can do. I think fear is contagious. I really do.
Yeah.
I think it's learned. I think it's through direct observation. And I think, again, when you think about mind and body and how they interact with one another, if you learn at an early age that your mind and your body are not friends, by default, you're living fearful without even knowing it.
Right.
But it's because your mind and your body are at conflict so often that you're just walking around feeling bad.
Yeah.
Right? You don't know that it's fear. You're not calling it fear. Someone else might be able to easily identify it as such.
And this brings in the notion of some of my psychological background of understanding fear and understanding emotions a little bit, and recognizing that we do so much to ignore or avoid those feelings that are uncomfortable, those emotions that are uncomfortable, rather than recognizing that we are fearful and that it's okay to have fear in this moment, and that you can still have fear at the moment, but still function in a way that's accordance with what matters to you, what's meaningful to you. And I think there's a sense and there's a balance, especially now. We can use this almost as a clear example of, there's people who are understanding that you need to wear a mask, but yet they still don't want to get contract coronavirus. But at the same time, you have to live your life. You have to go to work, right? There's a point where you can't not work anymore. There's a point where your kids have to be schooled in some way, and they have to be socialized. And we get I'm seeing consistent cases of people, worrying about their kids constantly on their screens. It's the way they communicate. It's the way that they're interacting with their friends. But now it's even amplified, even more than it was 5 months ago. And so it's thinking about, well, how do we recognize that we can be fearful and yet still live within ourselves? Can we take in the data and say, yeah, I'm afraid, but what control does that have over me? So emotions tend to be automatic. And so when you say, is it innate? I think fear can be an innate emotion.
Yeah.
But the reaction and response is where it changes.
While fear can be innate and action and response can be altered, can change, I think the only way that truly happens is that the narrative for so long has been avoid, avoid, avoid.
Right.
The narrative needs to shift to cohabitate.
Mm-hmm.
We need to learn through pushing through our own thresholds
Right.
how to cohabitate with what scares us the most.
Mm-hmm.
It is a silly analogy, but it's one that most can relate to. As a child, there's the scary monster in the closet that we avoid to the point where we don't want to go past it. We stay on the other side of the house. It becomes all-consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, through natural maturation, we get closer to the door. We push through the threshold, figuratively and literally.
Mm-hmm.
We go inside. We turn the light on, and we make ourselves feel it.
Mm-hmm.
We make ourselves feel the fear. And once we do that, it dissipates. And until we start to learn how to cohabitate with coronavirus, it's just a question of how often fear factor moments pop up, and I think the level of intensity.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, final thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
When you come to a place where we've talked about your professional growth, performance, how sport is obviously an integral part of who you are. It's contributed vastly to your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And now that thank you for sharing some of that personal stuff with the nature of your wedding plans, decisions that you need to make. Do I stay sitting in the middle of the house while it's burning all around me?
Mm-hmm.
Is that in my best interest as it relates to those that I love? What comes first, me or others? When we put all of that together, if fear is false evidence appearing real, where does your head go? What's the head game that you play?
I think it's again it's similar to the avoidance, but it's being able to face that evidence and examine the evidence. Thinking about what thoughts is this situation eliciting. What's the emotion, right? The emotion tends to be automatic, and my thoughts tend to follow pretty in suit in terms of a fearful situation. So what am I thinking in any given moment? What's that thought, and can it be challenged? And recognizing that I don't always have control over a situation, and that has to be okay at some point. And I think in the same nature, recognizing that although I'm letting go of control, I'm not accepting my fate. I can still react and respond in a different way. And I feel like some people think it's, again, a black or white situation, but there is a spectrum. And being comfortable with the spectrum of both fear, of joy, of happiness, of sadness, sorrow, whatever it is in terms of that's eliciting those emotions and thoughts that come with it that paralyze us. Once we start to see that they are on a spectrum and that they're not fully in control of those emotions, thoughts, and feelings, but in control of how they're learning how to respond, how to accept that that is a feeling, to open the door, walk through the threshold, see that there's no monster, still think that there might be a monster, maybe when I go to sleep, right? But at the same time, I've slept how many nights, and how do I go through that threshold? How do I continually do this over time and eventually not necessarily mature out of it, but learn that you are more than capable of overcoming fear, that people do amazing things when they put their mind to it, when they set themselves those goals, and that fear wasn't necessarily not there, not present, but that they're overcoming it or they're pushing through it in some way.
Yeah, well said. The evidence of the scary monster no longer being in the closet. We're all about challenging ourselves, our athletes, to engage in the evidence. Go find out what is real, what is perceived. And again, under this notion, this discussion of fear, the false evidence. Is it false? Is it perceived? Is it imaginary? Is it an assumption? Is it predicated on misinformation? So many factors as it relates to our world in present 2020. Or perhaps this is for another conversation, when the evidence is not false, when in fact we have explored it and the evidence is real, is that a different animal? Is that something that we can overcome as easily with deliberate practice, with looking at how we engage our own scary monster? Because many would suggest that the scary monster has been replaced by the one that nobody can see, the one that we're being told is out there, that we should be very fearful of, that appears to have some evidence behind it, but yet when the gap remains so huge as to what is still unknown, I think that's where it starts to grab us the most.
Right. And are we always looking for that? Is that always going to be something that we're constantly looking for as human beings? Is that natural in us to look for the next thing that's going to, put our survival at risk? And that we may naturally be inclined to looking for danger in our lives because it's a protective overall factor. And we look at whatever the news or cycles or experiences in our own lives that say, are we going to fail? Is our survival at risk? Are the people around us who we care about at risk as well? And how do I do at all means protect them? And I think that...
Is that possible?
No, because
exactly.
there's always going to be another thing.
Yeah.
And it's, again, that's why I say on the spectrum, and I think we both have kind of agreed on this, of recognizing that fear will always be there. But in response to that, that's where you can make change. That's where you can examine, is the false evidence real? And if it is real, what do I do about it? If it's false, how do I move on from
the controllable in the face of the perceived uncontrollable?
Right.
Well said. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to sit down and chat.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Hopefully we'll be able to do it a whole lot more moving forward. Dr. Hunter Stevens, courtesy of Mindful Athlete Training. Thanks so much. And I think that's a good place for us to kind of wrap up. So week in and week out, we're going to be here from our brand new studio. It's going to be an evolutionary process. So for all of you interested persons out there that's paying attention, start to ask yourself, what is your own head game that you're going through? My name is Dr. Lee Picariello. This is the Head Game Podcast, powered by Mindful Athlete Training. Thanks so much.